Double, first requested to me by VAJFER, based on the 1846 novel and directed by Richard Ayoade, is a 2013 black comedy thriller film that stars Jesse Eisenberg in two individual roles. He primarily plays Simon James, a clerk in a government agency that finds himself stuck and rather unhappy with his life. Well, his situation goes from bad to worse when an exact replica of him shows up and begins working at the same government agency. As the two learn more about one another, they realize how different they are. But before long, things begin to get pretty weird. As things get weirder, the situation worsens in a multitude of ways. Alright, so The Double is a film that I had pretty much no familiarity with. I did a little pre-watch research and found out that Jesse Eisenberg was the star here and that Richard Ayoade directed it, but that was about the gist of it. I quickly realized that this movie was going to get weirder and weirder and weirder, and this is more ultimately of an art house film than most of the other requests I've done thus far. And the overall vibe of the film reminded me a lot of Eraserhead, if you guys have seen that one. So clearly this is a movie that's not for everyone. It's for the more hardcore film buffs that are looking for a more unique and odd viewing experience. But it reminded me a lot of Eraserhead because there's a lot of really dark lighting techniques, the characters communicate and act in extremely unusual ways, and the vibe feels more like a dream sequence than any actual event based in reality. The whole entire experience feels very uncomfortable because you're watching these characters behave and communicate so unusually that it just feels like a very eerie viewing experience. Once you get into it, you do begin to settle in, but despite that fact, the movie is still pretty damn unsettling. I like the visual aspects of the movie because I felt like they properly aligned with the more thematic elements within the story. A big reason this movie feels as unsettling as it does is because of the cinematography and lighting techniques that add so much tension to virtually every single scene. Even when the characters are doing the most mundane and seemingly harmless things, it feels so eerie. It works as a thriller in large part because of how much tension there is in every single interaction and character act. I also want to recognize how the music plays a big part in the establishment of such a continuously eerie vibe as well. There's music here that sort of reminds me of Moonlight's score, at least in the string composition, but way more dark, obviously. The main theme plays almost anytime something significant happens, and after a while, it really does start to make its imprint on the film in a dark and pretty eerie way. Like I mentioned, the movie is very dark, very ominous, and very creepy. It works for the most part, but I do feel like sometimes the film comes across as a little too weird for my personal taste. This isn't an objectively bad thing about the movie because it does vary based on taste, but there are times where I feel like the movie sort of gets in its own way. It gets in the way of telling a cohesive story to instead be edgy and artistic. And one specific aspect I can mention here without going into spoilers is how the characters speak to one another. It occasionally gets so unusual that it pulled me out of the experience just a little bit because it's just so abnormal and weird that it's hard to latch on to any of these characters in any real way. That's the risk you take with a film like this though. With that said, you do feel a commitment here from all the actors and there is a unified atmosphere to the experience. Does it sometimes get old? Yeah, for me at least, but it's not the fault of any of the performers. I actually was very impressed with what Jesse Eisenberg pulled off here because he has a lot of responsibility on his shoulders. He has to play two very different characters that interact with each other in highly unusual ways. And he's also asked to show some emotional depth to his characters based on face value only. I think in a lot of ways, Jesse Eisenberg is maybe the biggest strength of the film because he plays two characters simultaneously that are similar yet different, and they ultimately become increasingly at odds as things progress, and that's pretty compelling. It's always tough to play two characters in the same film, but Jesse Eisenberg does pull it off here. He gets a bad rap a lot of times for his Lex Luthor impersonation, or his performance rather, but that's not entirely his fault. He's just not a great fit for that character in my opinion. He's much more suited for roles like these. With films like these, I always like the more mysterious and intellectual aspects. This is absolutely a mystery where you have to really dive deep into the anatomy of the scene to understand what's actually going on here. This is yet again another request that's super trippy and out there and requires a lot of additional thought after the credits roll. There's a lot of theories you could come up with because I don't think the answers are abundantly clear at any point. And I think that ambiguity does work for the most part. It works for this specific film because it's just weird and unusual enough for it to not make sense and for that to make sense, as weird as that sounds. I enjoyed this movie overall, but as I mentioned, I do find it goes a little bit too far out there every now and then and doesn't quite rein itself in as much as it probably should. Despite that though, like I mentioned, I really enjoyed it, and I think you will too, provided you like this kind of film. As for the pros cons list, I thought The Double delivers a tense and mysterious thriller story, great lighting and camera work, an excellent score that adds to the creepiness of the experience, and lots of thoughtful ambiguity. As for the cons, I think the movie tends to overdo it and go too far out there sometimes. Overall, I'm going to give The Double an 8.5 out of 10 and recommend you check it out, but only if you like this kind of unusual art house style experience. So have you guys seen The Double? What did you think of it? And if not, let me know why not. Also, what's the weirdest movie you've ever seen? Don't request it though, because my fragile soul can only take so much at this point. Either way, this is WillFoxification signing off. See you in the next video.